Hi, welcome to SHOWstudio's live panel discussions, fully digital for the first time. This season's discussions and debates are the most important subjects affecting the fashion industry. I'm your chair, Harris Elliott. I'm a cultural curator, creative director, and stylist. And I'm going to get each of the panel to be able to introduce themselves. And I've asked each of them to find two words which describes how they're feeling at the moment. And I thought it only fair for me to do the same. And I guess my two words are hopeful and a little bit faithless. But let's go over to our first panel member, Michel, if you'd like to tell us who you are and what you do.
My name is Michel Gaubert, and I call myself a sound designer, which means I do a lot of soundtracks for fashion shows, but also commercials, exhibitions, stores, everything music related. And I would say I'm like you, I feel hopeful. And I'm very curious for the new life to come. I'm quite impatient to see what's going to happen. So, but I would say hopeful.
Richard, if you could go next.
Yeah, so my name's Richard. I'm creative director at NAMESldn. It's a digital production company. And my two words are optimistic. And I would say, I'm going to go with digital. I'm embracing this side of the digital world.
Excellent. Kat?
Hi, my name's Kat Davey. I'm exec producer for Liberte Productions. I produce all of Nick's work. Two words to describe how I'm feeling is grateful and challenged.
Interesting. Now, for you, Nick.
Okay, I'm really having trouble with these two words. I can think of lots of words to say. Anyway, my name is Nick Knight. I'm the director of SHOWstudio. I'm also a fashion image maker. And I've been working in fashion for the last 40 years. And my two words are difficult to choose because there's lots of different emotions at the moment. I guess one is enthusiastic. I'm really looking forward to the future. That's a given in any case. Secondly, I can't work out whether it's heartbroken or angry. What's been going on in the world for the last, many years, but so acutely so obviously and so acutely in the last few weeks, makes one seethe of anger every day, and also makes one incredibly heartbroken at the cruelty that people mete out to each other. So I don't have two depressing words, but it is a kind of strange mixture of the times are changing. So I feel very enthusiastic for change, because I think lots of things need to change, both politically and in terms of the fashion world, but also incredibly angry and saddened by what I'm seeing happening in the world.
Agreed. I can echo so much of that and others. And then thinking about today, I've been working out how to frame what is essentially a big topic, and it's a topic which we've all had in our lexicon or in our dialogues or in our spheres for a really long time. And then given what's been going on, echoing what you're saying, it's hard to sum that all up. And then there's a line from Lauryn Hill which wasn't about fashion, but it was fantasy is what we want, but reality is what we need. And kind of thinking about how we look at what those next steps will be as the industry changes, because there's been a reluctance to change and a reluctance to move on in an industry which is always about the next thing anyway. So it's almost a bit of a paradox or a bit oxymoronic that we create newness every 3 months, every 6 months for cruise, for mainline, for couture. But then there's so many isms and ists which are around, and some, like I said, the reluctance to kind of break down and change some of the strongholds and the barriers which have prevented some of the change and prevented some of the difference, whether it's within the misogyny, the racism, the way we adapt on a basic aesthetic level for what a show should be. And the show represents so many different things to all of us in terms of our jobs and our passions and our enjoyment. The reference that I've asked SHOWstudio to pull up Bella was from McQueen show Spring Summer '97, and that for me sums up the fantasy and the magic of why I wanted to get to be involved to work in fashion. There was something which transcended belief and was something really magical. And so, but then once you start working in it, sometimes the magic isn't really there or it rubs off. But I guess I wanted each of you, and go in the same order, starting again with Michel, if you could talk about some of the things or some of the reasons why you got into working in shows in the first place, and then some of the things that you don't necessarily enjoy about working in shows. And I think it's just how we frame the conversation of, we all love working in it and it supports so much of what we do, but at the same time, the reason we're having this conversation is because we know that it needs to be renewed, and it needs to be a new model.
Well, for me, the reason I started doing this is in the 80s, I had a very good friend who was Mugler. She was the muse of Thierry Mugler. And one day she invited me to a fashion show. And I loved fashion ever since I was a kid, also music. And I was so impressed by what I saw, like all this energy, all this strength, all this positivity. It was all like sparkling for me, you know. And when I left, I said, oh my God, I want to do that. You know, that's exactly for me, because I love both. And I guess I did it. I mean, I was like early 80s and like early 90s later, I started doing it. And then I love doing this because it's for a lot of reasons. Musically, I like to turn on people. I like to share what I know. And I like when people go to a show, I like the show to be a real experience. And music is part of it, you know. And second, I also like meet the designers. I like to talk with them. I guess I'm more than just a person who makes music for them. I like to understand their world, what they want to communicate, the image they want to bring, and the kind of mood they're in. And I think like the best results is when there's like a connection between a real conversation between the designer and me. So lots of them are. So that's for me, that's very satisfying. It's also to bring an image of fashion that people don't necessarily know. And I think the show is very exciting. But, you know, you bring all these people together. You bring like all the models, the hairdressers, like this cast of character who are all here for one thing. And you share that thing, you know, what you do, and you show it to a lot of people. And I think it's a nice gift in a way, you know, like, I think it's nice.
Richard?
So yeah, I think I'm kind of the same. I'm trained as a fashion designer, but I've never seen myself in fashion or to be a part of fashion. So while at university, I worked on my like end of year shows and things like that. So for me, it's all about telling that story and allowing other people to view a sense of escapism and have that 10 minutes or 15 minutes to escape into a world that I've worked with the designer and, as Michel said, the hair and makeup team and the photographers and everything. So I think, yeah, that's why I got into fashion. The one thing I find frustrating at times is the fact that it's over so quick, that you can't live in this bubble for a little longer. It's a moment that's gone. And I want to tear down the elitism of how it's been played in before in fashion. So for me, I'm trying to tear down those brick walls, and like I'm sure we'll talk further on later. But yeah, that's why I'm really embracing the digital world. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, echo much of that, and similar, Michel. Kat?
Well, I got into working on fashion shows by interning for production company Gainsbury and Whiting when I was at university, when I was at Central St Martin's. And it was something that I fell into because I realised I didn't want to be a journalist. I was doing the FCP course. And I fell into it and then became slightly addicted to the anticipation and the atmosphere that you get when you're producing a live event rather than a shoot maybe, or a fashion film. You know, there's that atmosphere backstage for the hour before, and it's that nervousness, the same feeling you get when you're in the wings of a stage, I guess, if you're a performer, but it has to be right just for that minute. And I think we sometimes used to spend 6 months, you know, working on producing a show, you know, right from the beginning, pretty much as soon as the season before ends, you start looking for locations for the next one, you know. So it's quite incredible how you spend 6 months working towards something to show 10 minutes of a performance or a show or fashion. And you can't really beat that feeling, I think, which is amazing. And it's quite nice as well to see how, you know, fashion shows are evolving, and it's how they kind of interact with both the immediate audience and also the public and people watching through different ways, whether it's, you know, via live streams or videos, or, you know, having a location which means the general public can see it live. I think it's really interesting how designers are slowly targeting different ways to access a wider audience.
Thank you. Nick?
I mean, I sort of have a sort of slightly kind of a two-step answer to this. My first involvement with fashion was completely on a sort of street level. I was a skinhead and I did pictures of skinheads and made them into a book. For me, it was very much a fashion statement and very much about fashion. And that was the first thing I ever did. And then I started working for a young magazine called ID Magazine, right at the beginning of the 80s, when ID Magazine was about photographing people who were in the streets. So none of the fashion I was originally involved in was commercial fashion in the sense it wasn't a fashion show. It wasn't until 1986 that I really started experiencing fashion, I guess, which is more what we're talking about. I was commissioned by the Japanese designer Yohji Yamamoto to work on his campaigns, first of all, his men's campaigns and then his women's campaigns. And I remember being invited by the French art director who worked for Yohji, called Marc Ascoli, a brilliant man, to come to Paris and see a fashion show. And I'd never been to any fashion show. No, a completely different world that I was living in. And I went to Paris and I was surprised on so many different levels. For starters, this was 1986, as you got close to the Cour Café du Louvre in the center of Paris to see a Yohji Yamamoto fashion show. At the time, it was quite unusual for people to dress completely in black. But the closer you got to the show, the more and more people you saw in the street dressed in this almost kind of religious blackness. It seems nothing now, but at the time it was quite strange and quite different. So it felt like you were part of some sort of cult. And then as for the fashion show itself, I was really surprised at the boredom in the audience, how the front row looked like they were having to do something they didn't want to do. And the photographers, the catwalk photographers, which at the time were just gathered at the end of the catwalk, was so rude. I thought this sort of genteel world that I was being introduced to didn't really merit this kind of rugby scrum of paparazzi style photographers who were shouting the names of the models and throwing canisters of film, because it was film in those days, across the catwalk. So I was really surprised by it. I don't live well in that environment. I don't like being out in a sort of crowded situation. And as I got a little bit more known in fashion, I began to hate going to fashion shows more and more, because I keep seeing people and, you know, you just meet lots of people, and I just don't work well in that environment. So I was like kind of, last thing I want to be is on the front row of a fashion show. So I never particularly loved them. I loved the spectacle. So Alexander McQueen shows, and Harris, you pulled up one at the beginning of this, were incredible bits of fashion theatre. But always, you know, very much the pinnacle of it. Most of it is not like that. Most of it is quite tedious. And the best ones, the ones that Michel works on, the ones that Richard's done, I'm sure other than one that Kat's done, are all the best ones. But there's how many, 500 fashion shows every season? And they're not all at the same level as a Chanel show or an Alexander McQueen show or a Prada show. And I have been feeling increasingly, I'll stop doing this monologue, I've been feeling increasingly that the world has really, really fundamentally changed in how we communicate. Back when I grew up, the family would sit around the television in the evening. That doesn't exist anymore. Your entertainment was back in the 1950s, you'd go to the theatre. Nobody goes to the theatre anymore. It's just a different structure of how we communicate. And I think fashion has to reflect the reality of our lives. It has to reflect a generation of young students who are graduating now, whose first word is sustainability. That's the first thing they say to you when they describe their collection. And I don't think that fashion at the moment, in the way it's performing, is sustainable. And I don't think it feels like something which is in keeping with our times. Most of us talk across our phones, and that's where we get our news from, our friends from, our family from. But the fashion world has taken a long time to get to a point where it understands that. So it's existed, I think, for the last 20 years, almost in the bubble, separately from how the society in general has moved on. So I don't take away from any of the great fashion shows, but I personally didn't ever particularly love that environment. And I also, I just don't think it feels in keeping, in step with what people are actually doing now.
Agreed. I mean, with a lot of what you've said, there's a number of elements within the industry which are, as I was saying earlier, are outmoded and unwieldy. And the whole process of taking the touring circus from either the buyers, the editors, from one place to the next, from a sustainable point of view, just to pick up on one point, that in itself doesn't work. So, and among countless other things, I mean, Richard, you started to mention that you're looking to tear things down, which has, I guess, more of a strength and an angst and a rejection of what's going on. How do we do you, Richard, and as we can now start talking amongst each other, how do we then start to change this beast, this platform, this joy? It's not all hate, but there's a lot of good and bad mixing together. How do we begin to start tearing down some of these structures and start remodeling something that actually feels relevant and respective to the culture that we're in?
So, I mean, I'm going to jump in. I think, so for me, Names was created, it's a very tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. It's very ab-fab. What names do you know, sweetie? Names. And I don't like this, who do you know, what names do you know, to kind of work in this industry. So for me, I'm all about the new talent. I'm all about searching out those diamonds in the rough. I want to work with new people. That's not to say that I don't want to work with the Chanels and the Louis Vuittons, because I would love to help produce those shows. But for me, it's about being able to have this platform. And yes, I can't spend 100,000 on set design and things like that. But what I can now do in the digital world is allow you to have that moment. So for instance, like we've worked with Duran, and we created, I'm sure it's being played somewhere, we created him a abandoned mall and did some digital clothes. We're working with him to do some more clothes. But this kind of gives you a feel of how shows were. And I like that whole, like, as everyone's been saying, the anticipation of a show. For me, it still felt the same. I was still like, it's about to go live. When do we drop it? When do we email out the invitations? Who's going to go and look at it? But for me, it kind of, the hype's still there for me. So I'm still on the edge of who's viewing it, because I also can't see the people that are on the platform. So I can't run up to someone and go, oh, hi, thanks for coming. So for me, it's very much, I love this whole digital world that we're about to step into. And for me, I don't want it to be a gimmick. My aesthetic has always been, I don't want technology to be a gimmick. I've worked in fashion technology. I've helped produce some garments for Lady Gaga, the Black Eyed Peas. I've even launched an app-connected fashion brand. So like, I understand technology. I'm not saying I'm an expert by any means, but I kind of wanted to show the fashion industry that we can build a platform that can stay and it's seasonal. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to get on a soapbox and start ranting, but I'm very much excited. And
there's enough room on mine, Richard, in any case. We can share one.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, but then there's also double-edged sword. At one hand, you're saying you don't want it to be a gimmick, and maybe fortuitously or not, there was a guy that was wanking off on screen at the same time from that show. So from one point, does that just become a gimmick in terms of how we communicate as one point? And then there's another point which somebody else can pick up on, the fact there's a physicality and there's a soul and there's a connection and there's a conversation, say, like what Michel says that he has, so with the designers that he works with, that won't necessarily translate purely through a screen interaction.
So just to reference that image that's now playing, that wasn't my decision, that's Duran's work. So I work with the designer. I don't limit anyone to go, no, you shouldn't show that. So if a designer wants that clip, that's actually his homepage screen. So if you go to his homepage, that's what's showing up on his homepage. So for me, I never want to limit anyone. So yes, you may see it as a gimmick, but if you actually go into the website and go and explore, you can click on the hat and it'll zoom in and you're able to see, because yes, fashion is an emotion. We are very much, let's be connected to fashion. And Nick mentioned it, or someone mentioned it about fashion is the last thing to go digital. Like, it's very analog. Like everything else, our whole entire home is now connected. Like we live via our phones and screens. So why isn't fashion also speeding up? I'm not saying that digital will take over fashion, because we're all wearing clothes now. We're all being a part, like we still need to clothe. But I'm just, how do we cut down like sustainability? How do we bring the fashion sustainable angle a little bit better? We use clothes, ZBrush, like we're using a lot of technologies, and technology will keep growing. So it's very gimmicky at the minute, but as time develops, we'll be able to use the technology in a lot more sophisticated way. So for me doing this, I was hopefully and still trying to show that we can do something a little bit more seductive with this platform that we're trying to build. I
understand all of this. It's like, and I think that a lot of people I'm working with, I mean, I cannot say everything that's going to happen, but I've been in touch, with several major houses for future projects, and they're all becoming aware that digital is going to be part of their world. I don't think they're going to give up the shows because, as you said, fashion is an emotion, and I think a fashion show is an emotion. I'm sorry that Nick doesn't like them, but sometimes it can be like, you can get an emotion out of them.
I don't like parties, Michel.
Also,
I like being in crowds.
Yeah, no, but it's true that when you see a show that's really touching you, it's like there's nothing like the live experience, because like the thing that's nice about the show in itself is the ephemeral side. You know that all of this has been prepared like for such a long time, and like then it happens, and it could go well, it could go wrong, and then there's this magic that happens that doesn't always translate digitally. But now that everyone's aware that it should be a mixture of the two, like I think there's going to be less crazy shows, like people like going to the other side of the world to do something. And already that was like this. I mean, this year, Chanel decided to do their cruise show that got canceled, but it was only like for 200 people. They want to build less complicated sets. I think that's something that goes, with everyone. They want to be more sustainable, as you say. And the digital thing, I think it's nice if you mix it with the real, with the real experience. Also, fashion is, to me, is very social, not in the way that social, you're going to meet people and say, hi, how are you, blah, blah, blah. Social is because of the way you represent yourself in the time you're in. And like someone like Cardin, like, in the 60s said that fashion was the mirror of society. And in a way, it's true, because like, whether it's made by fashion designers, it can be also made by people. I mean, when you look every time there's like, I refer to the punk aesthetics, in London, like, it didn't come from the runway, it came from the people, and then the runway took it from the people. I mean, so every time there's like a big changes, like now, something's going to come out of it, not necessarily from the runway, but they're all aware of that. I think they're much more, they're less in the bubble than they used to be, and they want to be. And it's been curious also for me, because I'm a judge. I mean, I'm not a judge. I'm like, some kind of a judge at the LVMH Fashion Prize. So every year I go and meet 60 designers, like, more or less all in their 20s, 25. And the number one word is sustainability. Like, there's not one who doesn't say that word, since the very beginning. That's the main concern. And I think, like, the older voices listen to that. They're all aware of that. And I think it's going to happen. Like, also talking about Chanel, I've been working on the cruise show that was, we can look at it a bit later. That was completely digital. It was done in Paris. And four models that were in Paris. And each model, there was 4 days, one day per girl. And all the clothes have been made with fabrics that was already in stock at Chanel. And I think they're going to do the same thing for the next couture show. Like, they want to use things that they have and patterns that they have. And they're very aware of being more sustainable. I think it's the order of the day.
Michel, just to pick up on something that you've said there, in terms of fashion shows reflecting the times, and somebody else can answer it, but the Chanel show that we're showing, there was a big negative write-up in the New York Times about that show because it doesn't reflect the times that we're in. And given the fact of we've just gone into lockdown, and it's not a discredit on anything you've done towards it, but as a show, in terms of a world which is in collapse and disarray and implosion. How part of the problems that I see and feel why fashion needs to change, and partly why we're having this discussion, is because fashion as a platform doesn't for ages really reflect what is actually going on in society. So many cues just get missed by some of the things that get put out and in the way that they create statements.
Yeah, I read this review by Vanessa Friedman, so of course, I mean, I read everything she said, and some of it I agree with, because it's like, it was not a good timing, but like, everything was scheduled for like the past month, you know what I mean? So, I think it was, it was in lockdown, but then Chanel told me they have to do something because in January, when the clothes are going to be delivered, they need to have clothes in the stores, right? Chanel also has a company that employs 70,000 people. So all these people had a job, and during the lockdown, like, all those people have been paid, and they didn't require any help from the government, like Chanel. So Chanel wouldn't make the debt of the country bigger. So they paid everyone, from their own thing. So I understand this part of them, because it's like, they have to do something. And then I also understand that, it was not so timely for all the reasons we talked, but then they went beyond it was scheduled to be on that day for a bunch of things, because they have like, all the sales team, everything was like ready, like they had all the lookbooks out, like, all that kind of stuff. And that's the way it happened, and I don't think they were totally inconsiderate.
I think as well, don't we all need it?
It's like a bad timing. Maybe they were not advised properly, how to do this. I don't know. What were you saying?
Sorry, Kat, go on.
No, I was just saying, I think it's really difficult for brands because, everything that Michel's just said. And I think people sometimes need to dream big and have a bit of hope, and, we all strive and kind of hope we can get through this, don't we? And we can eventually get through to some normality. And I think, like Michel was saying, Chanel, along with other brands, they're trying to keep going, keep people in jobs as well. And just sometimes, because it's the fashion industry, I think it's scrutinized more than other industries. But I think that, they're clever. They're trying to think of clever ways to approach people and their customers and, people out there. So,
but do you not think that, given the likes of people like Richard, the skill sets that we have and the technology that's available at our fingertips, that even if you still need to put something out, which is to sell more clothes, digitally something could have been created within a few days or a week, given the amount of resource that they have. So even if the clothes are being put out there could have been some kind of semblance or response or engagement. And I think it's too easy for the institution and the business and the politics and the politricks within fashion to just get away with, we weren't able to say or do anything else, when we all know that before some of the biggest and best shows that we've ever been to, designers are still cutting like minutes. I know, so obviously a brand like Chanel is not doing, for those kind of shows, for a cruise collection, are not cutting garments on the models when they're backstage. But I think part of the reason things need to change is because we've allowed these structures to kind of dominate in this oppressive kind of way and not be able to respond and change to what's going on. There's sustainability, and there's a huge race pandemic which is going on. And I just think it's not every designer's responsibility to necessarily respond to that unless they have the capacity to do so. But I do feel as an art form, we do have a responsibility to be relevant.
I think Nick probably comment on this, but I think also the problem is, though, it's a common kind of misunderstanding that people think that, and Richard too, that something digital can be more responsive or quicker or not as expensive. You know, I think that is something, when I said I feel challenged at the moment, I think that is something that everyone is assuming at the moment, and actually working in a digital way is sometimes very expensive and very lengthy as well. So it's not necessarily the quick option to respond to things. I don't know, Nick, you might want to.
Yeah, well, you and I both know that that's not the case from what we're doing at the moment. It depends what you do. There are different ways of doing things. I do think that what we're seeing at the moment is a huge cultural change going on, very much needed in many different ways. But we are seeing change happening, and people right from the CEOs and the head designers at companies are aware of this. They are stuck, or they have been stuck, in a system that hasn't necessarily been the best way of doing things. And I think some people are seeing this as a way to move forward and out of a system which was felt difficult. And in a way, if you're asking to find people to solve a creative problem, the fashion world employs some of the best creative minds on the planet, whether it's Riccardo Tisci or Miuccia Prada or Yohji Moto or Duran or Gareth Pugh. These are some of the most creative people around. So if somebody's going to solve something, I'm sure they will do, once they're freed up of the sort of rather strict structures. Gareth Pugh started doing fashion films rather than shows back in the early 2000s, and then was advised by people in the business that he should stop doing that and go back to the fashion show. So there are quite rigid structures. People are coerced into showing in a particular way, which makes sense within the structure. What's happened in the last 3 months or so, for different reasons, has broken a lot of that. So to look around now and to see the sort of slightly chaotic scene that we see around us in terms of how to express what fashion is this season, because there is a fashion week going on at the moment. Not that you would know it if you looked at the British press, that London Fashion Week is actually happening at the moment. You would have no idea of that looking at the British press. However, it is, and it is a slightly experimental, shall we say, version of Fashion Week. But what we're looking at is the beginning of change. And I have enormous, and I think one of the things I said right at the beginning when I was asked to choose 2 words was enthusiasm, because I think we are going to get into a much, much better situation. I'd like to see fashion shows which, are really tailor-made for, person who wants to wear the clothes. So, Kat, you could watch a fashion show by Prada, and it would actually be on your avatar, and every piece of clothing would have been fitted to your body. That's the sort of thing I think that we're going to look forward to in the future, much more user-friendly fashion. It's quite simple. If you tune up, if you gave all your details to your Prada account, they could tailor make everything to fit to be seen on you. Same for me. If I wanted to look at the Givenchy Men or whatever it would be, I could see me wearing it. And I think it's those sort of huge leaps we need to get to, where we're not just stuck in this way of doing fashion the same way as if it's the only way to do it. Whether it's been good or bad, whether there's been high points or low points, it no longer feels that it is the right answer. And there are much, much, much better things happening with things like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, CGI, all that sort of stuff are different ways. I'll stop rabbiting, but one of the things I found, because I've just been through, we did something called Class of 2020, which is a sort of fashion graduates on SHOWstudio. So I saw sort of over 400 different fashion portfolios from all the young students who were supposed to be graduating in 2020. And a significant number of them were making and designing virtual fashion. So not fashion for us physically to wear, but for our virtual selves to wear. And it's not unimaginable that in 20 years' time or even less, we will not be representing ourselves in the way we do now, that we will have a virtual representation of ourselves, which we want to dress. And we can dress in any way we want. So, I just think we need to look for what we really, really want from fashion, what we really, really want from the world. And shows of kind of conspicuous wealth and ostentatious fashion shows are really not cool at the moment. So, and the designers all know that. They realize that most of them are not in fashion with that they can't be seen to be spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds on very, very flashy shows. That is just contre-courant. That's just against everything that's happening in the world at the moment. But they all realize that. It's not that they don't. It's just they need to find a new way of doing it, and they haven't done it.
They realize it. Of course, they're very aware. It's just like you have to find a way how to do it. But like, I still don't think that the traditional show is going to be completely cut out of the thing, because most of the designers I work with love the show. That's like the highlight of the year. It's not. They like to get all the people together. They like to make this communion, with a bunch of people and see their work come to life. And I'm a believer that there will be both. There will be also the live fashion show, which is going to be much more restrained, because I don't see them spending a lot of money. But in the meantime, like they were spending a lot of money, like in the year 2000, not to impress the people that were coming to the show, but like also because on YouTube and on their own websites, they were reaching like an amazing amount of people. Like, at Chanel, like I think sometimes there was like 16 or 20 million people watching the shows just because people would say what it looked like. But I think these kind of things are going to be very different also. It's not going to happen the same. And I think that each brand is going to find a digital language, and to show their things and be more, as you said, Nick, user-friendly, like easy to relate to, so, and I know they're working on this. So I did work on something that was quite fun. There was an Animal Crossing fashion show, and I asked Bella to pull it out, and it was good because it's also quite universal. I think there's like so many million people who were playing that game during the pandemic, and I, for one, am also playing it. And it's funny that you made your own little world. It was like this little fantasy world, and it's also very cool that a lot of kids, they make clothes from runway or from designers. So you can get all the clothes from Raf Simons, from Prada, from Undercover, from JW, Loewe, or Bottega Veneta. And
in Animal Crossing just then.
Sorry?
That was a little Animal Crossing version of you, wasn't it?
Exactly. But it's funny because and the kids share it to other people. So whoever you are, you can get them from people, and like you can design even houses and stuff like that, and everyone shares it. And I think that game is like the principle of that game might be a cool milestone, in the way of doing fashion also, because like everyone can share their vision, and it's free and it's cool.
Just on that, I think this makes a really good point that digital fashion isn't necessarily for our generation or the generations before. It's a new generation that has never known a world without the internet. So to have their avatars, to have this a little escape, Fortnite, FIFA, they're all connected via their screens and PlayStations. So for them to have a world where they can buy designer clothes for their avatars is a lot more interesting than them wearing a Supreme hoodie. There's all this sense of desirability within the digital world and also the physical. So I think, yeah, I keep going back to echoing this digital world that we're trying to portray a little better. And like Nick said, yes, there's a fashion show going on at the minute, but no one's really spoke about it because I don't think the brands that are big enough have invested enough money to really show that this is a platform. For me, it's just a website, which I was a little bit disheartened. Not that I'm upset, but just disheartened that we could have done a little bit more. Like, and I'm by no means pushing my platform, but there's that sense of, let me go into the world of that designer. Like, I'm working with a lot of other designers, and yes, it is a little bit expensive, and it takes just as much time as anything else, and there's a place for it, but you can still do the physical show and then embed it into this digital platform, so that viewer or that attendee of that show can go into this world and continue to live as a loyal viewer or buyer of that brand, because we all see it in shows that people dress a certain way to show that they're loyal to that brand. So to go into this world and just continue living, then we're also in discussions of creating digital avatars with stores, so you can go and do a 3-body scan, and then you can have that avatar of you and go into, say for instance, Duran's world and try on all of his garments without actually having to purchase anything first, and then you can purchase it made to your order and to your measurements. So we're looking at a lot of new way of sustainability, but I think for me it comes down to technology scary. Someone, Nancy Tilbury, once said to me, the oil and water, well, fashion and tech is like oil and water. They just don't want to mix. And I think we're slowly starting to creep in a little bit more, like I've done. And I'm sure, Nick, I know you've shot a blush dress for Gaga, so like with Philips. So technology is slowly making its way in, but fashion is still very scared. And I think if we started teaching it at, say, an academic level, I think a lot more young designers would embrace it a lot more and be able to have a better understanding. But because it's not taught at universities or schools, it's very hard for them to also grasp that technology is here as a tool and not, oh, we've got to do something at the moment, how do we do it? So,
but it's understandable also, because like fashion is very physical. You know, you touch fabric, you make clothes, it's made from the body. And these people, that's what they work on. You know, it's like they fit clothes on models, and they feel the fabric, the weight of the fabric, if it's warm, if it's cold, if it feels good, you know, and digital is like, on that level, is very flat. So the fashion people are a bit beware of digital, because it's not something they always relate to, because they don't get it. You know what I mean? That's where the oil and the water is.
Yeah.
But they understand that, you know.
But I would say, as a trained designer myself, I can still hold a lovely piece of silk or cotton and tell that technologist, oh, this is how it needs to feel. There's a new vocab that needs to be born out of the technology. Because if you said to technology, create me a denim dress, they'd give you a rigid, oh, this is a blue color, there it is. And I think being in the room with a technologist and being able to seductively tell how a silk should fall on the body will allow a technologist to then really understand how it's going to look, rather than it looking a little robotic and stiff.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thanks. Not trying to cut you there. No, because we've come to 45 minutes goes really, 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 really fast. And given all of what we said, and this conversation could run for days and weeks, and it has run for years, as an outro, given the fact that, Nick, you talked about the rage that you felt currently at the beginning because of what's going on, and we're talking about the changes in digital, and a few of you have mentioned that the word that keeps coming up is sustainability. Is there maybe a sentence, maybe it's too hard to say, a sentence or 2 sentences that each of you could say how you feel from a sustainable point of view and from a racial point of view, because racism is really affecting all of us at the moment, how the fashion show could be different, and then we'll have to wrap it up. I don't mind who goes first.
Michel?
Me? Well, I know that people are really working on the sustainable bit. I mean, whether it's like building their sets, to do sets for fashion shows, also like making people travel, and also the way they make clothes. I mean, that's going to be like less. Some people are not very sustainable. I mean, I know some designers, they design a whole collection, and if they don't like it, they design another one and a third one, and they only show one. Happens to the rest. I think that's going to be changing because they're realizing themselves, and I think the company they work for will probably put a brake on this. Then racism has been an issue like for a long time. It's nothing new anyway. So, and curiously, I was watching a Karl Lagerfeld show like a couple of years ago that was put back on Unforgettable Runway. I don't know if you know this Instagram account. And it's the first one I worked with him, was 1989. And the casting was incredibly diverse. It was like, you know, there was like someone from the Philippines, there was a girl from Indonesia, there were Brazilian girls, there were like black girls, there were like, you know, very much more than what I saw after the year 2000, and I showed it to cast. Oh my God, that was incredible. And like, you don't know what happened, you know, between that and between 2002 was coming like, I guess the Russian girl moved like very skinny things. And now people are realizing it's not right. It's not wrong. It's wrong. You know, and they all want to pay their dues to this. You know, they're all very aware of being inclusive. And Pier Paolo did it a lot, you know, at Valentino. He was the first one to do it. And people are following this. People are very aware and listening to all of this and wanting to do good, you know, and wanting to, maybe they feel sorry for what happened. Maybe because sometimes, you know, this happened, you're not aware of it, you're caught in your thing, and they're all realizing that it's wrong. I mean, not all, I didn't talk to a lot of people, but they're aware it's wrong, and they're going to do for the better, you know, and
okay. Thank you.
Hopefully it's going to be listened to.
Hopefully. Nick?
I mean, they're huge questions, Harris, and they're huge.
No, I know. I just think it's hard for us to discuss this subject and not give. I'll just pick one, or just pick one element. I know they're big questions, but I just think I wouldn't be true to myself if I couldn't ask a question which I know people so passionately about on both of those issues.
Try to give it an answer it deserves, rather than be sort of to try and do something in a soundbite, of course, which is tricky. We have over 400 years of empire building at the sort of expense of other people's lives. Well, you've got to put that right. So, you know, there's a massive cultural change and education that has to happen, which goes to every level in virtually every society. You know, this British Empire has been built on the absolute exploitation of a whole race of people, as has the American country and economy. You know, and at some point, you know, we have to actually take active steps to rebalance that injustice, and that's huge. I mean, that's a massive thing that has to happen. It cannot fail this time. It cannot go back to what it was before. It has to be taken on board, and of course that affects every one of us, whatever we do. So that's, you know, that justice has to happen. It's very hard then to talk about fashion because it seems in some ways that fashion feels flippant in comparison to something as important as that. However, I've always maintained that fashion is one of the most important art forms we have. It's how we express ourselves as people. It's one of the most widespread ways of self-expression and saying who we are and that we belong in this planet. So I think fashion has always been for me incredibly important and shouldn't be trivialized and made to feel it's about sort of things which aren't important. It's incredibly important. So I think, you know, that there's a huge journey to embark on immediately. Things have to change, and we're up against a lot of very, very, very strong elements of society that don't want it to change because they'll lose power. I would say that change happens sometimes more easily than we think. If you look at the sort of body shape, and again, this might sound flippant, but if you look at the body shape that has come into being in fashion at the moment, that of Kim Kardashian and people like that, it's a totally different ethnic body shape than has been around for 100 years or so. And that happened in the last 5 years. Kim Kardashian and people like Kylie Jenner, and I'm not, you know, I don't want to put up any sort of depends, but they have 150 million followers. That makes houses like Chanel or Prada seem small. That makes Vogue magazine seem irrelevant. You know, these are huge forces, and they are forces that will change things. I think there is signs of hope within the fashion world that things are changing. You know, you have Kanye, incredibly important force. You have people like Virgil in there. You know, there are people who are changing how fashion is, but society has to change. And what will lead that and what will force that to happen is hard to say. But we have an incredibly important journey and a very, very, we have to take it, otherwise we can't go on. We have to take this journey. We have to do this. We have to address injustice that's been forced on people and is still being forced on people for hundreds of years. So, sorry, it's got into some huge political speech, but it's hard to balance that in terms of conversation, what's going to happen in the catwalk. You know,
completely.
Catwalk is part of it, you know, and catwalk is what you do and what we do. And like, it's part of that conversation, of course, you know, everything, we're all at the beginning of a new age. That's obvious, you know, and it will have to be. And I think everyone's willing to understand and to hear, you know, that we've been too far and we have to go somewhere else. But all what we do, we're still going to do it, you know, but we'll do it in a different way and a better way, you know, and to make sure everything is like more, everything is better, like, you know, and try to do it with honor, you know, and not with greed, maybe.
Or tokenistic. Thank you. Because we have, sorry to cut you, Richard and Kat, but because we have gone well over time, I think that, thank you, Michael and Nick, Michel and Nick. Thank you for your points. We're going to need to wrap it up now. So I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists and thank you for everyone who's been watching. And for more extensive fashion, visit showstudio.com. And if you're watching via Show Studio's YouTube, be sure to like, and hopefully we will see you next time, be that in a physical or digital way. Who knows?
Who knows?